This is video number 12, Prosody, Pattern, and Redundancy. You're going to school. You're going to school. You're going to school. Although these sentences all contain exactly the same words, in exactly the same order, the messages they convey are different. This difference in meaning is signaled not by the words in each sentence, but by the intonation that is used when producing them. Intonation is like melody, with different words being pronounced at different pitches. In English, pronouncing the end of a sentence at a higher pitch than the rest of it usually indicates that that sentence is meant as a question that can be answered with yes or no. These melodies, we can call them intonation patterns, work the same whether a sentence is long or short, even with sentences of only one word. The kind of meaning that gets changed by intonation is called mood. It's the difference between a statement, a question, and a command. In addition to differences in pitch, the words in each of these sentences are produced with different intensity. For example, in the version of the sentence that signals insistence, the word going is said with more volume than it is in the version that asks the question. You're going to school versus you're going to school? Saying something with added intensity, with a little more volume, is called stressing that part of what you're saying. In English, stressing a word is a way to emphasize a point. In English, stress has other functions as well. For example, for some two-syllable English words, changing which syllable is produced with the most stress signals whether the word is meant to be understood as a noun or a verb. So, reject is a noun, but reject is a verb. Compress is a noun, but compress is a verb. The same pattern holds for record and record, object and object, import and import, contract and contract. In addition to the pitch with which things are pronounced and the volume, the stress, used to pronounce them, words can be pronounced with different duration. So, for example, yes has a slightly different meaning than yes, and okay is different than okay and okay. The pitch, intensity, and duration of speech sounds are called prosodic features, or prosodies. Prosody is used in all languages, but different languages use prosodies to convey different kinds of information. In Chinese, for example, changing the melody of what is said usually changes the meaning of individual words rather than the mood of sentences. For example, if I say, 一碗汤, I mean a bowl of soup. If I say this phrase with an English question intonation, 一碗汤, raising the pitch at the end, the phrase isn't understood as a question about soup. Instead, it's understood to mean a bowl of sugar, because changing the melody of the last word from tang to tang changes the meaning of the word from soup to sugar, but not the mood of the sentence. Patterns are things that are repeated in a predictable manner. We seem to be programmed to look for patterns in the world around us and to treat sequences that are only approximately similar as though they were actual patterns. Patterns exist in every sphere of life. We perceive patterns in the flowers on a field, clouds in the sky, gravel in a driveway, houses on a street, streets in a city. We recognize patterns not only in space but in time, cycles of days and seasons and years. The routines we participate in during a meal or over the course of a day, a week, a year, or a lifetime. Language is full of patterns. The first things we notice about a language are usually the patterns of its sounds. For example, we can easily hear the difference between Italian and Russian, even if we don't understand a word of either language. The patterns of a language determine what can occur where. In English, for example, we can say the sounds P and R or P and L together at the beginning of words, but not the sounds P and S or P and T. This presents a problem when we borrow words from languages where they do occur together. A problem that we solve by not pronouncing the P's, making pronunciation fit the English pattern. Linguistic patterns structure our expectations. For example, in English, grammatical patterns influence whether we interpret a word as a verb or a noun. Patterns also tell us where to expect what kind of information. In English, the main point is put first, and the supporting matter follows. In other languages, the main point might be put last or in the middle. Words occur together in patterns. This becomes apparent when those patterns are interrupted. For example, when words in a sentence are missing or garbled, we are often able to infer what was intended based on established patterns of association. Finding patterns helps us think. Once we identify a pattern, we relegate it to the background, permitting us to focus more attention on phenomena that disrupt the pattern. New information always comes in the form of variations to expected patterns. Unfortunately, not all variations contain information. Some disruptions to expected patterns are simply noise, random distortions that carry no meaning for us. It is very important that we be able to distinguish between information and noise. To do this efficiently, we need to learn which variations fall within a normal range and which do not. We can only learn this through repeated exposure to normal pattern variations. We need an understanding of the big picture before we can determine how individual parts contribute to it. Another aspect of communication that helps sort out information from noise is redundancy. Redundancy means that the same information is conveyed more than once. Redundancy is everywhere. When we fry bacon, the information that bacon is frying comes to us through sight and sound and smell. When food goes bad, we don't just see it, we can also smell and taste that there's a problem. Redundancy shows up in every aspect of natural languages as well. For example, in English, when the subject of a sentence is plural, the form of the noun shows that it's plural. The pluralness of the subject is also redundantly communicated by the form of the verb. In the example of the big green German car, emphasis was put on the color by rearranging the adjectives. The information that the color is being emphasized is also communicated by putting extra stress on green. Some questions are formed by rearranging the words in the sentence. The information that the sentence should be understood as a question is also often redundantly supplied by a change of intonation. All this redundancy may seem rather inefficient, but the fact is that it doesn't actually cost much to put it in, and it helps us with cognitive processing. It's especially helpful when, as often happens, part of a message is garbled or lost. For example, if someone is cooking bacon in the kitchen and you're in the living room, even though the visual information is no longer available, you can still get the message that bacon is on the way via the auditory and olfactory channels. That information is coming over multiple channels also gives us the option of choosing not to use all of them to get our message across. We saw this earlier when we changed the statement, "You're going to school," into the question, "You're going to school?" by changing only the intonation and not the word order. Redundancy in the messages we send each other arises when the words, the grammar, and prosodies being used occur in patterns that work together to reinforce a common message. These linguistic patterns interact with relational, cultural, situational, and worldview patterns to help us formulate and comprehend messages. Reliance on information carried by patterns in these other domains allows us to include less linguistic information in the messages we use. However, doing so risks failed communication if others are not aware of the patterns we are relying on to carry our meaning, or if those patterns are garbled or unclear. To get a feel for this, think of a person who goes to the same diner every morning for 3 weeks and orders bacon, eggs, and coffee from the same waiter, then one day walks in and asks for the usual. What will the waiter think he is asking for? It's a safe bet that the waiter will infer that he wants bacon, eggs and coffee. Why is this? Did the word bacon, eggs, or coffee appear in the request? If not, how are those items understood to be part of this message? Where did this information come from? One way to look at it is that co-occurring patterns have informed the waiter's expectations. This patron has come to this place at this time every day and ordered the same thing from this waiter. In terms of our framework, these activities have formed patterns in the situational, relational, and language facets of the interpretive context that have co-occurred enough times to become associated with one another. This has happened enough that, even if the patron doesn't say a word, his arrival at this place and time trigger expectations in this waiter's mind of what he will say. The repetition of situational and relational patterns are enough to convey the message that up till now has only been conveyed via language. The information that the patron wants bacon, eggs, and coffee is already in the interpretive context because it has become part of the pattern. The patron confirms the waiter's expectation by repeating a pattern that both of them have learned from the wider culture. The usual is a special term that is used in these situations for precisely this purpose. There are other terms that are close to this term in meaning, but they have not taken on the cultural function of the term the usual. This cultural pattern reinforces the relational and situational patterns already in play. We can test our theory by making a few changes to this scenario. For example, what will the waiter think if the client walks in one day and says simply, "No bacon today"? In this case, the waiter is likely to infer that while the patron does not want bacon, he does want eggs and coffee. Since the information about bacon, eggs, and coffee is already part of the context, it is enough for the patron to make explicit how today's message is different to the norm for the desired information to be conveyed. Finally, what would someone who observes this interchange from a neighboring table make of it? Would she conclude that the patron wanted eggs and coffee? It would depend on her understanding of the context. If she had also been present for the previous 3 weeks, she would have the same expectations as the waiter. If, however, this was her first visit to this diner, it might be a mystery that declining bacon resulted in the arrival of eggs and coffee.